Hey everyone, welcome to another Manufacturing Live. Today I have with me a really cool special guest, Tandy. Tell everyone who you are. Tell us what your job is.
Hi, Mike. I'm Tandy Banks. I'm a senior industry process consultant with Dassault Systems.
So what does that mean? What's an industry process consultant?
Well, we like to spin it whichever way we need for the day, and so that could be helping out our clients understand how to tackle a problem with software. It could be understanding how to apply our tools into their environment. It could be just helping connect them with the right resources to progress, do things better.
Okay, so you just sort of talk with customers, figure out what their needs are, and then help them find the right solution.
Yep, a lot of time here in front of the screen, helping folks all over the world, helping them solve problems.
Okay. Well, before you got into this industry process consultant role, where did you start? What's your history? Where's your background? Where did you get into manufacturing? Because I find your past really fascinating.
It depends on how far we want to go back.
All the way to birth, all the way to birth.
All the way to birth.
We want
Yeah.
to know
So
about the first day you were on Earth.
yeah, no. There are some pertinent things. I look back and was very fortunate. Growing up in Oklahoma, kind of rural area in Oklahoma, I had some experiences I shouldn't have had. So in the early to mid 80s, in a little bitty school that had about 60 students in it in elementary school, somebody wrote a grant and put a couple of computers in front of us, and we started programming and learning about computers whenever I was in the third grade. And that was just kind of unheard of in the early 80s, especially in rural Oklahoma. And then just had experiences around computers and was pretty good at math and science, and but kind of ended up settling to an art career as a high school student. I was a pretty decent potter, and so I did a lot of clay and sculpture, and earned some scholarships, and decided that, hey, I'm gonna go to school to be an artist, and learned pretty quickly that's going to be a pretty tough road to earn a living. And so I looked back and realized that, hey, yeah, this math and science, this thing called technology that I was involved with whenever I was a seventh grader, making little wooden balsa wood cars that shot down a track at the equivalent of 300 miles an hour. That stuff was pretty cool, and there was this stuff called CAD and CAM that I did. A big light pen and a green screen, and went ka-clunk ka-clunk. But I made drawings on a screen, and that was pretty cool. And so I started remembering all those kind of pieces of my education background, and really kind of focused in on the doing part from technology. And we were very fortunate to be heavily involved in TSA, the Technology Student Association, as both junior high and high schooler. And so whenever I kind of hit that brick wall in art, I looked back and went, hey, I got this other stuff that I can do. And somebody said, that sounds a lot like engineering. And I was, okay, cool, let's check into that. And that's kind of what got me started off into to this area.
So I got a question. The first computer-aided programming, was it Logo? Is that the language you use? Because that's the one I use, where you make the turtle move around the screen with the basic programming.
I don't remember what it was, but yeah, it was on Apple IIe's, and
Yep.
we used a lot of characters, and we made Voltron scroll across the screen, and that was the coolest thing ever. We thought that this is really neat. So yeah, that was my first programming and computer interactions.
So being a Midwestern kid like myself, Oregon Trail, was there
Oh,
Oregon Trail there?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Caterpillar, Oregon Trail,
Yeah.
or
Okay.
Worm. Yeah, spent a lot of hours on that.
So when we get to a little bit further and you get into the engineering part, you spent a little time out in oil and gas country, right? Doing some work like that.
Yeah, where I grew up is definitely oil and gas country, and kind of seeing the the flow of that industry over the years. It really wasn't of interest to me at first. Just seeing the downturns in those industry over the years, and so at first it was I kind of avoided it. And whenever I went to design school, I actually started architecture. That's really what I thought. I think I'm gonna draw house plans. I grew up a carpenter's kid. I've always um, cutting dimensional lumber, putting them together, making something. So I kind of thought architecture will be the thing. But within 3 weeks, I found mechanical. I made that connection back to my roots and understood that, hey, no, this is really what I want to do. So again, wasn't until later that I got into oil and gas. But yeah, certainly spent a lot of time designing petrochemical equipment, and that's where some of my experience both with SolidWorks and with manufacturing. That's where I've been blessed with some of my best experiences.
Yeah. Now, when you say manufacturing, you did you did more of like the technical components. Can you talk a little bit about like that? Like, I'm always curious in the journey people take, because I was at a discussion last week up here in Nebraska at a manufacturing day event, and someone was like, well, how did you get into this realm? And I was like, honestly, it's dumb luck. I picked it out of a catalog. So I'm always curious, because I think most people that end up in our shoes, very few of them woke up when they were 6 years old and was like, I want to be an engineer and do software stuff. It's usually doctors, lawyers, policemen, astronaut, all that good stuff. So when you were in oil and gas and you're doing some of those, talk a little bit about your manufacturing experiences related to that.
The step before oil and gas, I was working for a equipment manufacturer, designs a lot of pneumatic and hydraulic equipment. And being a young designer, I wanted to know the manufacturing processes. That was just something that got instilled in me to really understand design for manufacturing. So I spent as much time as I could on the shop floor, understanding how press brakes operate, understanding whenever I draw something on a sheet and send it out to the shop, what's that going to affect? Because growing up, again, like I said, Midwestern kid, not a lot. I had to do my own automotive repairs. And I know I said, okay, when I design something, I'm going to make sure I can get to all the bolts, because having to, pull an engine in order to be able to get to a bolt, that's ridiculous. I'll never do that. Well, guess what? First design projects, I screwed up a lot. And so I spent as much time as I could on the shop floor trying to learn and keep those old codgers from throwing wrenches at me, or at least shade, as I walked into the manufacturing floor. So I dug deep into the manufacturing processes. Really wanted to understand pneumatics and how electronics controlled pneumatics and hydraulics. And so I got deep there. And then when I got my opportunity to go into the oil and gas, it was a similar thing. What is this company's manufacturing capabilities? Go to the shop floor, understanding what's going on, seeing massive vertical turret lathes, swinging around a 2,000-pound chunk of steel at high RPMs. It's an incredible thing to walk up and see that, basically with no guardrails, and be able to understand what's going on. So that kind of fostered that love for the smell of coolant and for watching chips pop and understanding what's going on and listening to that sound of chatter. So I don't know. There's just something in me that drew me to manufacturing. But having a high influence on the software side of things, it's understanding the processes, the tools, the information that we put together on a computer screen. How does that affect what happens in real life, ultimately to delivery of product, to an end use product to a customer? And so that's what drew me in on the manufacturing side.
Okay. Which, I mean, you said everything that I love about manufacturing too. I mean, there's just that whole, like, you get in that world and there's such a art to it. It's interesting you talk about, art in your early days, because when you talk about, chatter and machining and the process, when all of that comes together and it's all working in harmony, it's just like creating a sculpture, creating that beautiful piece of art, because there's just so many pieces that make something come to life, right? As you were talking about that, you go back in the CAD days a little bit before me. We're not going to give away our age, but we'll just say it's more than a decade at this point, right?
Yep.
So how long ago, when did you first get into CAD? Were you a 2D guy that went to 3D, or did you jump into 3D? Like, how did that transition work?
As I was talking about, junior high, and that's when I started in CAD, and fortunate enough to start with the 2D CAD system, and even had a little CAM, had a little desktop mill, make chess pieces and that kind of stuff. So
was it the wood router thing? Like, it was like this.
It was wax. Yeah, it was a little
wax.
wax. Yeah, little wax, 2-axis lathe, and we had a little It was a 2-axis mill, if I remember right. We had to actually manually crank down Z, and then it would do a little bit of 2D pass on it. But a little couple of little desktop machines, and so yeah, started definitely 2D like most people in the 80s, and then went until 90s, started learning some of the mainstream, what was considered mainstream 3D platforms at that time, and tried to cobble through as much as possible. And again, just kind of exposed to a lot of different CAD tools early on, before 97 being exposed, a couple of years in being exposed to SolidWorks, and never really looked back after that.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of funny. You're talking about 2D CAD. The first CAD system I used was called CADvance in high school. And ours was like the educational service unit had this little router thing that went around, and you had programs that would like make this little wood baseball bat. And, you're only talking like a pen here. It would be like the white part of the pen. That's all the bigger it made. But it was like each school got it for 2 weeks. So it traveled around to all the different schools. And it's interesting you mentioned 60 kids, because my school K through 12 was like 100. So very, very much parallel in that Midwestern thing of, it's sort of crazy when you think about getting access to those pieces of technology in the early days in rural, what it wasn't even AOL back then. It was just, right. Here's a computer and a disk, right? Yep. So what is your favorite thing about what you do today? If we jump forward to today, what is it you love doing the most?
As much in the real activities as possible with our clients, and we get to sit in a seat, whereas a lot of our clients, they have to live their processes every day. They have to deal with all the noise, that kind of keeps them away from what they really want to do, and we get to kind of come in and play that consulting role, wherein we get to focus on either a problem, or sometimes we even get to look at the overall process, which is what I really love doing. I love looking at companies' overall business processes, and then start to drill down into the details of how each of the areas that we can affect, how we can make positive improvements in that. And so we get to work with companies all over the world, and I get to kind of hit snapshots of this. And so we get to bounce around a little bit company to company, as opposed to being focused in same desk every day, every environment where you get kind of that minutia that kind of weighs heavy on personnel. And we get to kind of come in and play the hero sometimes. And so that's what I really like doing.
That's one of the things I like about it too. And I do have to remind everyone here, like, this is an open discussion. So if you have questions, I think last month we got how do we do taxes with DriveWorks. So this month, if you have questions for Tandy, you have questions for myself, please type them in the chat. Tandy and we talk all the time internally, offline. So, we're sort of comfortable with one another. We know how these work, but we would love to get some questions from, the audience that's going through it. Now, you talk about industries and processes, and, we go back to you and I talk quite a bit. So before the call, we were talking about, like burnout and the challenges that happen with customers, because you sort of hit on a point there where most customers are bogged down with, I have to put out this fire today, I have to put out this fire this hour, I have to figure out how to make payroll this Friday. And a lot of times they get in this system of survival, and they don't get a chance to actually look at the big picture. So, and I think some of that's worsened a little bit. Myself, from what I see, is everyone's burned out. Owners are burned out. VPs are burned out. Employees are burned out. What types of things have you seen, especially in the last 10 years, how business has changed and how companies are trying to adapt, or, they went from being a leading company to just getting by? Like, what is your perception on that? Because you see a lot more customers in a bigger scale than I do.
It's definitely been an era of change. We all know that. That's the unspoken, right? Things are coming at us faster than they ever have before. The last couple of years have felt a lot like every day is a dumpster fire, and whether it's personnel burnout, realizing everybody's dealing with personal issues. We've had some stress related to illnesses and family losses, and the hard stuff. The reason why we get up and put our pants on every day is usually to take care of our families, and so everybody is carrying that to the office with them. So we all realize that. We also understand that we've been pushed out of our comfort zones. And, a lot of us old codgers, we don't like being pushed out of our comfort zones. Even though I've been change agent forever, you come into my house and move my recliner, we're going to have issues, right? So even though I push change in areas, I still don't like changing my own areas. So we've had this influx and this high frequency of that hitting is high noise. And I think what it's done is it's caused, the good companies to pause for just a minute, realize what's important, and maybe kind of refocus on that. And so we see some of those companies doing that, where they're focusing on some areas and they realize that there's a long game associated with this, and they're reinvesting, they're caring for their people, they're trying to strike that work, personal life balance, and they get that. Other companies may be a little more stuck in their ways, and they're not dealing with the change as well. And that's where we're seeing, more of that fatigue and burnout, and we're seeing, a high turnover in a lot of companies because, people kind of need that something different, and they're trying to figure out what that something different is. And so that's at the personnel level, and it's at the company level. And like you said, owners, directors, managers are trying to figure out how to deal with this, and things are coming at them at such a high rate. That's why we're seeing some of this division and chasm. It's not just division from a political perspective. It's not just, division from there. We really are seeing that divide in how companies are going to evolve and move forward out of this era that we've had.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you get to a point of, a lot of employees are like, oh, management, they expect management just to have all the answers. And I think in this new world of where we're all competing globally, faster, better, cheaper, well, hopefully faster, better, cheaper. A lot of times owners and management, they don't have all the answers anymore either, because they have to make a decision faster, where before they could have 6 months to think about a capital purchase. And now it's like 6 months. I can't wait 6 months to make the decision, because it'll take another 12 months to get the piece of equipment if we decide to do it. And I can't wait 18 months, right? So you're getting a lot of gut feelings, best practices, thrown out the window of like, well, I don't know what to do, right? So realizing everyone is in this pot, not just, well, employees are expecting management to know and be perfect. The honesty is a lot of management, they're just trying to tread water too. So we did get a question that comes in, and I'm going to ask you first, and it's not about taxes. We're good. That was last month. One of the questions is, any key factors for picking out a trainer CNC machine? What's a good controller that you would pick? So I'm going to good starting CNC machine.
So I don't know if it's fair to try to pinpoint one down. But what I'll be a little bit more safe in my answer here. I would look around at your local resources. If you've got a local tech school, if you've got a local high school that's tech related, and or maybe reach out to your network of vendors and partners that you work with, because at the end of the day, having a good community around anything that you start, whether it's a CNC process to get started with, or whether it's you're implementing lean for the first time. Ask around to your network. I know you guys in Nebraska have a good manufacturing network alliance. We have the same thing here in Oklahoma, and so I think most regions do. If not, call one of us and start that conversation relationship where we can help, because any piece of equipment, if I get stuck, I need to know where to go, and whether that's the interwebs or whether it is friends, I would much rather lean on somebody that's kind of been there before. And I understand that's the nature of the question here. Yeah. That will be my safe answer is kind of talk in your buddy system and see who else has got something.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that, because it is the interesting thing about NC controllers. Since you and I both support worldwide, right? or a variation of worldwide. It's interesting because the answer to that question is sort of tricky. Here in the US, my recommendation would be a FANUC-based type controller to get started versus a Siemens. Siemens has way more powerful controller. They're very popular in Europe. If we were talking about suggesting something in Europe, I would suggest a Siemens controller. But here, if you look at most of the machine tools, right, all the way down to your hobby, put it on my desk like a 3D printer. In the US or NAM, most of them are using FANUC based, right? So GOO, GO1, GO2, G84.1, G17, if you're looking at like tilted working planes, those are all pretty common. So like I had a Matsura for a while before I relocated. A little hard to relocate that big monster 500 miles. So I changed up my facility and my shop that I'm building now. I have a GoFab Plasma, and then I have two different Tormach machines I run. The benefit of those three machines is the G code between all three are very, very similar. And they're actually not that far removed from the Matsura that I had before. So, staying in that realm as far as picking it up, if I'm going to train with a machine and then go out in public, I would recommend some type of FANUC-based control here in NAM. Again, if I was in Europe, my answer would be a Siemens machine. But to your point, it has to be something that you can get local support on, or someone in the region, right? So let's say I'm in Oklahoma, I would want to reach out to Tandy and see who the network is around me if I don't know that, right? If I'm in Nebraska myself, or the folks at Metal Quest, or some of those people, there's a lot out there. If I'm going to like internet web support, then the world's your oyster. There's communities for everything on that. The funny thing about communities is you get the best of us and you get the worst of us as humans. So you got to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt. But that's sort of the long version answer of that. It's not real easy. I can tell you for myself, I generally gravitate towards FANUC based just because it's the same from a laser, a plasma, a water jet, a mill, a lathe here in North America. A lot of that stuff overlaps. It's all pretty much the same. So the next question, Tandy, we're getting some good ones coming in now.
All right.
The question is, I'm in college, not me, this person. I was wondering, how do I learn what is the best way to manufacture a part if I don't have experience in a machine shop? So how do you learn that process, right?
Get plugged into a machine shop. Whether it's going and taking a job grinding parts, not the funnest thing in the world, but getting exposed into that environment is the best way to learn that. There are a ton of videos out there, and you can pick up a lot. But it's just like whether it's sports or really anything in life, until you actually plug into the environment, that's when you really start to learn. It's good to have a good academic knowledge of something, but you actually got to get your hands on something. And I think manufacturing really is that way. And even if we're not talking about old school, I say grinding, whether it's old school manufacturing or whether it is CNC programming and more push button type subtractive, or whether it's additive. Additive is the same way. You've got to get your hands in there and start working with it and failing. Hopefully very safely, and you keeping all your digits. That's one of my other marks of success over the years, is keeping all my digits on my hands. But you got to plug in there, and there are manufacturing. If you start to look around, whenever you drive around, wherever you live, start to pay attention. These are facilities that are along the edges of those common pathways, and you can find somebody who would be willing to help you. I mean, that's the thing about manufacturing community. If they understand that you truly want to learn, I've never been turned away from somewhere that they're like, yeah, come on in, pick up, help me sand these parts, and I'll tell you about the rest of it while we're waiting, for something to go. And then you progress into understanding tooling, and then you progress to understanding each individual machine. And I mean, it's a progressive process. Mike and I, neither one can unplug what we know from years and just hand it to you. It's a hands-on learning process.
Yeah. Well, and there's this funny thing called work employee shortage right now. So most manufacturing companies are looking for anyone that has an interest.
Yep.
And I don't know if anyone saw on CNN. I think it was CNN this last week. Our customer 5 minutes from me, Kawasaki, they started a line that is for moms and parents, stay-at-home parents, not just moms, stay-at-home parents, to work a shift, and it's scheduled around around the day where they can drop their kids off at school, they can go work for a shift, and then pick their kids up. And they've completely adjusted the ideology of how to manufacture a component based on what the workforce is. So let's say you are a student in college and you do want to learn how to manufacture products, even if that isn't your long-term plan. Most companies will work with you and say, hey, you want to come here for a few hours a week or an hour a day, and we'll pay you for some on-the-job stuff and you can gain some experience. Most companies are looking for really creative ways to be able to get parts out the door, but also educate the next generation. Because let's face it, these good looks on the screen you see between Tandy and I, they're aging every single day, and we're not going to be around. The whole focus is the next generation of manufacturer, and most companies are trying to solve that. So hopefully that answered the question. Again, Tandy and I we love to chat. So if any other questions come in, please ask. I am going to come back to one thing you said a little bit ago, Tandy.
Yeah.
You mentioned my favorite topic, lean.
Yeah.
So on this channel, we don't talk too much about product, but lean is one of my favorites. So let's talk a little bit about lean processes, lean management, and then we'll sort of skirt that product that we have in 3D Lean. So for anyone that doesn't know, can you explain a little bit about what lean manufacturing, lean process is, Tandy?
We can ask 50 people and we'll all give a different explanation for what lean is. But
exactly.
So here's my take on it. And another one of those things I got exposed to early on. But lean is a way that it's a philosophy of trying to reduce waste and continually improve. That's really the base level understanding of what is lean. And this came out of a lot of philosophies coming out of World War II, rebuilding a Japanese manufacturing culture, and that's kind of seen to be the start of lean. And there's several books out there. One of the big ones that most people point to is The Machine That Changed the World by Jim Womack. Kind of seemed to be the father of the lean philosophy. But whenever you understand lean and you understand it really is about reducing waste, and there's a lot of different waste, but reducing waste and continually improving, you can apply that to personal life as well as to professional life. And that's where I tell people I ride the line between efficiency and laziness all the time. I mean, that's yep. My career is I want to get out of this good quality, low cost, in a timely manner, but I want to do it with the least amount of effort possible. And that's where I really resonate with lean is looking at that and trying to reduce the waste, trying to do things better, faster, more cost effective, as much as possible.
It's an interesting thing, right? Because I always equate it to anyone who is a parent. Dads usually get tagged with this, right? Let's say we're going to leave on a trip and you plug it in Google or whichever time, and everyone wants to beat that time, right? And then if it's you by yourself, it's easy to beat the time. But then all of a sudden you have you by yourself, and then you have the family, and the family has to stop every 20 minutes for snacks and use the bathroom and everything else, right? To me, that's really what lean is. Like, we set out on a journey, we're going to do this and this and this, and then there's these distractions that come along the way. So we try to minimize those distractions to stay on whatever that target is, or in this case of a road trip, I want to beat what Google tells me, because how dare that computer tell me how long it's going to take. So in my thought of it, that's how I equate it. But I also, in my past, I was told that you're just that grumpy person that's never happy. And I'm like, well, that's because I'm sort of in that continuous improvement mode. Everything can always be improved, right? So that's sort of how I equate it. But when we talk about that, it scares a lot of people away. So can you give an example, like a real basic example of, a process that you've been around over the years of just doing one simple thing that had a big dramatic change to set people on that path?
Yeah, one of the way, to get nerdy kind of in our engineering to manufacturing side of things, one of the huge ones, and this is where I get to be a hero sometimes and really help people see things, is when you're manually inputting bill of material information, your BOM structure, your quantities, descriptions, whenever that's being manually input in multiple places, that's usually a huge win. Low hanging fruit, that's some of the terms that we like to use around lean. And usually come in there and say, hey, we've got a way to put that in one spot one time and then use it in multiple places throughout the organization as we need. And so that's kind of a very much a process thing, very much an office to manufacturing floor thing, because that's how we communicate what needs to go in the box to build a product.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good example of why are we paying someone to data enter this multiple times? And it's not a matter of why are we paying that person and we could get rid of that job, but couldn't we have them do something that's a little more value add? I mean, let's be realistic. In the 50s and 60s, if you watch like Mad Men, it was like, oh, I have to type at so many words per minute because that's what I do. Today, you do not get hired for a job and they're like, well, how many words per minute are you doing, or how many button clicks are you going to do this year because I'm going to time that. It's more of, okay, we need problem solving people. We don't need data entry people. And a lot of people that enter data can solve problems.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the stresses of businesses are going through. We are not lacking information and data, right? But we're lacking good, presented in a way data that we can make decisions on quickly, right? And so that's where we've been spending a lot of our time and efforts. You and I, as well as the rest of our teams, we've been working to help companies see implementing the right tools to collect that data and present it in such a way that we can make those decisions. And even the little things that lead up to that, how we put bill of material information in, how we put product information in, how we read that and make whether we're a machinist, running a machine, or assembly person, or somebody in shipping needs to know what goes in the box, or a customer, how they use that product, all those things along the path. It matters where we put the data, how we put it in there, so that way we can use it over and over again. And that's where I spend a lot of my time and effort is trying to reduce the effort it takes in order to get that, so that way we can hopefully get past this situation that we've been in for the last couple of years and help people move forward and get better.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. Last week, we had that presentation here in Columbus, and I keep coming back to that because all these discussion points are fresh in my mind from that. But we were in a room, Scott Volk from MetalQuest, myself, Dick Longoria, and we asked the crowd, like, how many of you can look and see what your company is doing right now? How many of you can see how your machines are running? And out of 100 plus people, one raised their hand.
Wow.
And it's a little shocking when I put the dramatic effect of the pause in the sentence and all that good stuff. But it's crazy when you think about people have to be tied to a physical location to be able to make decisions about that, And the other thing that's interesting about that is the other question we asked is, when did this come out? 2004, 2005 is when the smartphone came out. It's not very long ago, but think about your life before a smartphone. Now, it sounds great, but think about how much different you operated from 2004 to now than you did before. It's a very different world. Everything changes a lot faster. But yet, when we talk about manufacturing, we talk about lean, we talk about continuous improvement, we're still, at the Nokia flip phone, straight box phone car thing phase. And I think it gets back to that cultural identity of you're just numb to your process, right?
Yep. And And that's usually where we plug in, is because we're a fresh set of eyes and we can ask some of those questions. And so if you'll indulge me, we'll chase the lean path
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of terms, a lot of them have to be Japanese words that apply to lean, because that's where its roots were. And so don't let the glossary distract you, or the fact that we've been talking about lean for long time, 40 plus years in industry. Don't let that numb you to the fact that there's some very key fundamentals that work out really well. And so where I was going with this is, one of my favorite things to do is to go do the Gimbo walk and to go get on the shop floor. But if you have the opportunity, get somebody who doesn't spend their day on the manufacturing floor to go along with you. And so whether that's an office personnel, maybe it's a reception, somebody who sits up front and sees guests as they come in, answers the phone, those kind of things. Grab that person and go do a 10-minute walk around the shop floor, because questions get asked about, like, what is that? Where are those things? Why are they doing that? And they're very innocent because they truly don't know or don't understand. And a lot of times we'll just kind of gloss over them and go, oh yeah, we do that because that's what we do. We've been doing that for years. But if you stop and you genuinely listen and think through it in their eyes, you'll ask yourself, I don't know. Why are we doing it that way? Why do we travel this box from this side of the factory all the way over to the other side of the factory to do a particular task? Are there some ways that we can improve that? And it may be physically moving things to one another. It may be reordering a process. It may be putting a new piece of equipment in. There's a lot of ways that we implement positive change. But one of the big takeaways I'd give you is, get somebody who normally doesn't spend time on the shop floor and ask them to go do a walk around with you. And just 10, 15 minutes, an hour if you've got it. Depends on your facility. But you'd be amazed at some of the things that they expose.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was in a shop in Colorado once, and they were talking about, we we have all this new equipment and we're just not getting enough parts out. And so we were just standing in the middle of the facility and just chatting. And as we were chatting and they were explaining these processes and these challenges, I was watching. And what I had noticed was, in these specific CNC machines, and I won't give the name of it, but in these machines, they had tools spread out around the carousel. And this machine did not do the, just put it in the closest one. Like, they were specific pockets that went to a specific area, right? They weren't the dynamic carriages. They were, tool one is tool one. But the operators and the programmers didn't put the first 5 tools next to each other. So these carousels, which weren't that fast, would run a quick 2-minute op, and then the carousel would cycle. And it'd pick something, then around a 20-second op, and then it would cycle. And in like 15 minutes, I saw 3 of these machines cycle at least a half a dozen times to go find the tool in a carriage. And it was like 20, 30 seconds every single time. And so you're adding minutes to this little part. And it's like, part of your problem is just putting your tools together in the carousel. Like, there's no software to this. This is just logic. And when you ask them why, it becomes that death sentence. This is how we've always done it. And those are the things that kill a company, because you have the same investment for a machine no matter how fast it runs.
Yeah, but it really, if we, take a wide look at our day, we've all got those things. Yep. And that's where lean resonates. We can get into statistical analysis. We can talk tack time, and we're like, part comes off the widget every so often. And those are great things. And especially in high volume production facilities. But, so many of our customers are mid to low volume. And so you get to look at different things and understand, just having simple things on the shop floor, like a shadow board, so that you know where parts and tools go, and you can quickly look and say, that's out of place. Or, your example of the tool carousel, having the right tools in the right spot to make that efficient, not have to go all the way across the facility. And we talk about Metal Quest because we were fortunate that those guys invited us in. We got to go, see their facility recently. And so that's a shared experience that we have. Those guys, They spend a lot of time on the details.
Yes.
Things like designing their own lubricant carts, that move lubricant around the facility, and how they put lubricant into their different machines. They understand that those little things add up and they matter to the way that they do business. And so it was impressive to see what the Scots have put together there, and their team. I mean, their team is engaged, and that circles back around. We were talking about burnout. I didn't see burnout at MetalQuest. Those folks were plugged in. They understood what their job did to improve the process of the whole company, how it mattered what they were doing affected the customers, how satisfied that they were with the product. And they understood all that. And it was simple little things done well and done frequently. And so that, it was great to see lean very much in play, even though you don't see banners as you walk around MetalQuest. You don't see these lean things in your face all the time. They just practice lean, and they do it really well.
Yep. And they started with one piece and it grew over time, right? It just became part of the culture of what they do. And, you talk about the engagement. That's an interesting thing because, it's one thing to be engaged and bitch. It's another thing to be engaged and be productive about the way that you do it, right? And a lot of that, unfortunately, starts at the management ownership level of like, look, your opinion does matter. It doesn't mean that because you have an opinion, we're going to automatically do it, but actually being open to receive ideas and thoughts is a pretty key component, right? And the biggest disconnect I've seen in companies is the employees are like, well, nobody in management listens to me. They have no idea. And people in management are like, my employees never give me any feedback that's constructive. And it's like they build this wall, but there's no method for the ego to be taken out of it, right? And it creates that hostile work environment of, well, somebody always has to be right. Somebody always has to be wrong, when, the reality is we can both be a little bit right. We can both be a little bit wrong in what we do.
Yeah, and I was impressed with Scott Volk. One of the things that he said that really stuck with me was that we don't implement every suggestion. There are things that just aren't a fit. Maybe for today they're not a fit. It could be something that's just kind of out there. But he said it was very important to them to circle back around to the one that made this suggestion and explain this can't be implemented for these reasons, or maybe it's just a timing situation. And that was something that I think that they're doing right, is closing that loop in the conversation and helping people really understand that their opinions are valued, but that doesn't mean that we're always going to move forward with those.
Yeah. I'm going to guess there's going to be a question coming here pretty soon of, well, how do you get management to get on board with that philosophy and ideology? So if you are thinking that, I'm just going to jump to this discussion. How do you get management to implement that? Give your ideas first, Tandy, and then I'll give my ideas here in a second.
Proof's in the pudding, right? So as a business owner, business leader over the years, sometimes I don't have time to listen to the idea or whatever. It's not that I don't want to. It's just, we were talking earlier, a lot of things hit you. A lot of things are on your plate. And so, but whenever somebody has come to me and said, hey, this was an idea that I had and I've tested it out and these are the outcomes that can come from it, that's a completely different story. To your point a while ago, it's not just griping about the situation. You actually put something in play. And no, not all employees have the latitude to implement a major change, but if they do some homework and at least academically, plan that out, have a plan, have an understanding of what the costs are going to be involved, what the effort is going to be involved, and you have something a little bit better than a half-baked idea, that goes a long way in getting management's buy-in. Because at the end of the day, every organization, every manager I've had, director or whatever else, they want us to help them look good and the company to proceed. I mean, every one of them. So if what you're bringing to the table does those things, sure, there's always challenges of territory and authority, and we're going to have those because we're people. But whenever you have a good structured idea that's actually got some actionable items and some homework done behind it, I think most are very willing to listen and to give it a shot.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I'm also going to add a point. Some companies just won't adopt it. So there is a method to handle this, and then there's also the understanding that some companies just are not built to do that. So you sort of have to decide is, can we be constructive and provide the value and do the homework and, run it up the chain, knowing full well that I have passion and I believe this idea will work, but it may not fit what we're trying to achieve 6 months or 10 months down the road that I'm not aware of, right? I could have a great idea that would solve today's problems, but I don't know that in 12 months they're going to completely restructure this whole thing, right? The other component is like, I also, when you submit those ideas and you have that, you have to have the humility. You can't just be like, I work every day on this line and this person is just wrong. And I say that because there was a women's of manufacturing breakfast last week, and there was a lady that stood up from a company, and she'd been in manufacturing as long as you and I have, Tandy. And she went down on the floor, and they were talking about a press break area, and she was the one responsible for implementing some of the changes, and the person on the floor just didn't want to do it, right? For whatever reason, I'm not getting into the politics behind it. Not my place. I wasn't there. But long story short, the person on the floor gets up in her face, like nose to nose, screaming at her, telling her how it's not going to work. And whatever that dynamic is, that does not breed a continuous improvement philosophy for whatever reason, right? The point of continuous improvement is we all have to be humble enough to realize we don't all have the answers on our own. And to me, I think that's a culture thing. Like we talk about what MetalQuest does. Can MetalQuest always be better? Absolutely. But one of the core values that they have there is they understand that, they're, in their words, the third idea. You have an idea, I have an idea. Together we come up with a third idea. That type of philosophy breeds people wanting to be involved and engaged. When you have a, boss A sits at the top, and then we have middle management, and then we have the minions that work. That type of structure worked great up until about 10 years ago. And most people don't want to work in that structure anymore. And I think that leads us to the last little segment before we have to end this, and that is future workforce. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. I think we have some of our greatest problem solvers in the wings, ready to join the workforce. I'm a father of 5, and so my kids are all technically in the Gen Z era, from 22 to 11, and so I've got the case studies in front of me to kind of watch these guys and understand how they're going to play parts. And so I listen to them and understand they have different ways of thinking than I do, and that's okay. If we give them the opportunity to speak, it's probably that third idea, to bring it back to that point, because I have an idea and they have an idea, and if we talk together, we probably can get there a whole lot quicker and both feel like we're gaining ground. And so I'm excited about the next 10 years in the workforce. Some of that may come. I'm a kind of a social generational student. I like studying kind of how the dynamics of that go together, and I understand that our generation and this next one to hit the workforce, we're a little bit more alike. And so maybe I'm just resonating with those guys. We all pick on the millennials, and we're like, oh, we don't understand them, And so they're not done by any means. The millennials are not. They're going to be our middle managers here coming up soon. So we need to pay attention to that. But I do think because this next workforce generation has grown up in the era of social and everything on the internet, it's going to be interesting because they have so many resources. I tell my kids, you can learn anything on YouTube. On the internet, you can find videos. I do tell them to watch 5 videos, because if you only watch one, you might pick up the wrong one. And so, watch 3 to 5 videos on any topic. And that way you kind of have a better, broader spectrum of how to do something. But really there's no opportunity, like we've ever had to be able to learn and consume and from a global level, understand how people are doing things halfway across the world. And so they're coming to the workforce with that, and with also a mindset of maybe what's a little bit more important, because they've lived through these last couple of years as maybe a very young mind or just entering adulthood, and they're looking at things and going, family matters, my family time matters, the people that I work with matter. And so I think that's going to drive some of what they bring to the table. And I'm excited to see what we're going to do.
Yeah, the next generation definitely wants to work to live versus live to work, right? And previous generations are that. It's funny you mentioned the generational thing, because I remember a certain time in high school, and we'll put a little reference on it, but Nirvana came out, right? And Nirvana was big, and all the teachers hated it, and they're like, "Oh, you're the generation that's going to screw it up for everybody else," And now we're up here, and we're like, "Oh, the generation behind us is going to screw it up for everyone else." And it's a funny thing, because every generation has value. It's just a little bit different because of the evolution. And I think that kids are visual. It's interesting you mentioned the YouTube thing, because last week we were talking about it anyway. We grew up reading manuals. If I wanted to go fix my car, I'd go pull up a Chilton's or something that, right? And I would read the manual. People today, they pull up YouTube, and I'm just going to watch how somebody fixed it, and then I'm going to go fix my thing. And so when you're looking at hiring that next generation of workforce, what do you think that they want to do? And I asked this to kids when we had the manufacturing day at Metal Quest. I asked them, how many of you want to stand in front of a machine for 8 hours a day and just load and unload a part? Nobody raised their hand, because there is no aspiration beyond loading and unloading a part. But I asked them then, well, how many of you would want to use software to program this cell and the robot in it virtually? Almost all of them raised their hand, because they're visual in how they learn, which is very different than the previous generation. So a lot of jobs that are open and people are like, "Oh, we can't hire anybody, no one's available." There is truth to that, but you really have to ask yourself, are we trying to hire for a job that just nobody wants because it's out of date?
Or is it time to evolve?
Exactly. Could I put some automation in there and hire the person to manage the automation and use them for their brain? And I think that, you look at employees in the future, that's where they're going to be geared. The other thing I think that comes into play too, when we talk about software and technology, is you and I are in rural areas. So when you go to a manufacturing facility, you get the best talent available within 60 miles that's willing to drive, assuming you pay more than the other shop that's within the same 60 miles that's doing that, right? And you create a bloodbath of stealing everyone's talent. When you start talking about implementing automation and implementing platforms and technology, you're no longer bound by the best people within 60 miles. You can now get the best people within the entire country, because I can connect them remotely. I can give them a virtualized facility and let them do something remote, and then just have my people locally execute. So, I think it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know how many companies are going to figure that out, but the reality is the jobs that you hire for today more than likely won't be there in 7 years. They will be completely different. So if you're just hiring to survive for today, to load part A into slot B, you're going to be in trouble, in my opinion. So
yeah, I keep seeing that in lots of places, and that's a startling thing to think about, because I know how fast the last 10 years have gone. To think about in the next 10 years, it's all going to look different, and that can give you anxiety and hyperventilate, right? Or we can get to work. We can work the problem. We can prioritize. We can execute. That's the fun stuff. That's where we get to see it evolve.
Well, and I get anxiety about it too, because let's face it, we're getting older, and there comes a certain point it's human evolution. There comes a certain point in your career where your ability to continually adopt technology slows down. It's just a mental capacity thing, right? So, at the rate that all this is changing, sometimes I'm up in the middle of the night and it's like, how am I going to evolve to continue to provide value for what I do, right? Like, it's a thing we all should talk about, because everyone hits that age. Like, we all know people, like, they get to a certain point, they were leaders in what they do, and then it just, something mentally happens and it changes and they sort of stop at that spot, right? So we're just about out of time, but there is a question that came in specifically for you, Tandy.
Oh.
And so I'm going to keep my pedestal on the floor this time. I'm not going to get up and preach. The question is, how will digital twin technology help evolve manufacturing in the coming decades?
You just started answering it a while ago. It is that ability for us to plan, exercise. I get the chance to prove out my idea cheap before I ever cut a piece of metal, move a machine, anything else. I can do it in the software virtually before I try to implement it in real life. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we're trying to. That's our evolution. What you and I talk about is employing these software tools that we have and the platforms in order to be able to do that. And so that's why I joined Dassault Systems, is because I feel like we're the leader in pushing this out into the real world of manufacturing, is be able to do this. We started with offline programming years ago, right? We can prove over and over again how lean and how effective, cost effective, time effective, everything. We can better utilize our resources with offline programming. Well, this is taking offline programming to the nth degree and blowing it up, is because now we're taking, again, software is not, I'm not saying software is cheap, but I'm saying we're not cutting metal. We're not affecting the real yet. We can quickly iterate. We can utilize some great software tools, some analytics and some algorithms and AI and machine learning and all the really cool stuff we've been talking about for the last decade. We can implement this in a digital way, verify. We can even go to the point of deploying virtually, add in software in the loop, hardware in the loop. I can have my PLC, that's a real deal thing on my manufacturing floor, interact with my simulation and understand what's going on. I got my robot programming, I've got my CNC programming, and I've got my assembly things all virtually happening. Whereas in the past, we'd have to take those each individual case study and then try to put them all together. Now we have the capability to do it kind of all simultaneously. Watching Brent the other day simulate an 8-hour shift of production, multiple robots, multiple machines, and verify whether the change, doing an A/B study to understand this change versus this change, which one was going to be the more productive before I have to buy a machine. I mean, that's amazing, incredible, and I think that really is why you and I get up in the morning and come and plug in to do this job.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned the robotics thing. Like, we've been doing robotics in the virtual twin. I mean, robotics started at Dassault the same year as Solidworks, 97. So it's not like it's a new concept. It's just a matter of now it's ready for everyone, right? Because everyone can afford a robot. So right. It's an interesting thing. And it's funny you bring up that factory flow, because last week at that event, we had a customer come up and like, you're funny. It's funny you mentioned scanning that building, because we bought a $2 million tube laser for one of our new plants. And we went to put it in and realized there was a pole in the middle of the building, right where that machine was supposed to set. But when we looked at our CAD drawing, there was no pole there. No. But by scanning the facility, we now see those things ahead of time. And it costs a lot more to have my $2 million tube laser sitting there waiting to be put in, with people on site to rig it, move it, wire it, plumb it, sitting there waiting for you to figure out what you're going to do with a pole that's in the middle of your building. That's an expensive oopsie.
Yep.
Use Midwestern terms, oopsie. But I mean, that's sort of the where it's going and how it's going to fit in. And I think you're going to see more of it. And I think you couple that with the next generation that is, visual, and they want to learn visual. They want to explain visual. They want to collaborate visual. They don't want to write handwritten Word documents with 700 words in it. They're not wired that way. So the more visual it can be, the more hands-on it can be, the more immersive it can be, the more people can make the right decision faster. So with that, Tandy, we're at the end of our time. I do want to mention to everyone that all of these episodes, this one too, will be on blogs.solidworks or on live.solidworks.com. Blogs is the other area that we have for all the other content we have coming up. But live.solidworks.com, all the recordings will be on there. Myself, Tandy, if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to just, chat manufacturing. With that, I want to thank you, Tandy. It's been great having you on. I'm a little bummed that you're moving into another role where we don't chat quite as often. But any last words you want to give to the audience before we go?
No, thanks for having me on here. And like you said, we could chat about this all day. It's a passion area. And so catch me on LinkedIn. We'll get connected somehow. And just again, thanks for having me on, Mike, and for producing the show. I think it's good. It gives people an idea of how we work on the fringes and how that we can affect things from the side.
Yeah, absolutely. Catch us next month. We're going to have another special one, and then July we're going to do a Titans of CNC takeover. So please tune in next month and send any comments to Tandy or myself. Have a great day, everyone.